Peace, what's up everybody? It's your boy Jay Everyday, also known as Furious Styles. Today I'm going to talk about Lance Armstrong, Floyd Landis, and as a mirror or reflection of them, I'm also going to talk about Clemens and Pettite. For most people who don't know, Floyd Landis and Lance Armstrong were two U.S. cyclists who competed in the Tour de France. As most people know, Lance Armstrong won the Tour de France 7 times, I believe, if I'm not mistaken. And Floyd Landis won the contest once. Let me preface this by saying I'm not advocating cheating or I'm rubber stamping somebody that does cheat with regards to doping and racing or whatever the case may be. But let's go in. Floyd Landis, I'm not sure he was the first American to win the Tour de France. I think that was Greg LeMond, if I'm not mistaken. And I don't think he was the first cyclist to win the Tour de France multiple times. However, I don't think nobody has won the Tour de France more than Lance Armstrong. And I think even more than soccer, the French people tend to have a great deal of nationalistic pride with regards to the Tour de France. So I'm sure the fact that an American won the Tour de France 7 times, nobody was able to beat him, probably was a sore spot for them. So here's where things get funky. Lance Armstrong was diagnosed with cancer. More matter of factly, he was diagnosed with testicular cancer, which means he had a cancerous growth on his balls. I'm going to let that sink in for a minute, especially for the men out there. He had cancer on or in his balls. He proceeded to get treatment, and he came back, and I think he won the Tour de France either once or 2 more times after his diagnosis, his treatment, and training and everything. It was a remarkable feat. After he retired, he went on to start this foundation called Live Strong. But the Tour de France and the World Cycling Organization, or whatever the hell it is, there was always this taint around Lance Armstrong, and supposedly some samples from a number of years ago had miraculously came up positive. They just happened to be his sample. So, you know, they didn't tell you how many other cyclists' sample came up positive at that time, too. So I'm going to just put that out there as a qualifier. Subsequently, when he retired, got done with racing, I believe the next American to win the Tour de France was Floyd Landis. Floyd Landis was a teammate of Lance Armstrong on the cycling team. And the thing you have to realize about cycling is, yeah, you can win it as an individual, but it's really a team effort. And I think it's based on your time in completing certain stages. And I think there's like 14 or 22 stages or something ridiculous. You know, the Tour de France, I think it's over like 2,500 miles or something. You go damn near almost all over the whole country. However, getting back to Floyd Landis. So Floyd Landis was the next American to win. So he wins, and subsequently he takes a drug test. His drug test comes back positive. Yeah, there's a doping scandal, and yeah, there's this, and there's this. Everything that points to him cheating. Floyd Landis being how's a nice way of putting it, being the person that he is, when he finally admits to this, he then proceeds to say, well, I did it because Lance did it. So you weren't content with you taking your punishment. You had to go and talk about the next man. So Landis went to court, testified against him, and I think him and Lance Armstrong got into a war of words, where Lance basically called him a liar or something. And if I'm not mistaken, I believe Landis, from everything that I'm reading, Landis turned evidence against him, detailing how and when, and he was with Lance Armstrong when he did this and all of this stuff. Okay. So most of you will ask, well, why is that important today? It's important. It's not really important, but the reason that it's relevant today, or it makes sense for me to talk about it today, is because Lance Armstrong settled his suit with the government. Because, see, the government sponsored Lance Armstrong's team. They were the U.S. Postal Service team. And yeah, so they sponsored his team. They basically made all of this money and put all these advertising dollars into the team. And they say they were suing Lance Armstrong for like $100 million. Which he didn't really have $100 million. But this administration, the Obama administration, carried over the suit from the Bush administration to the Obama administration, and it finally got settled in the Trump administration. This has been going on for, probably 10 or 12 years now. I guess my biggest problem I have with the whole thing is, oh, by the way, let me put this in there too. So they reached a settlement. Lance Armstrong has to pay back $5 million to the U.S. government, and of that $5 million, Floyd Landis gets $1.5 million of it, and Armstrong has to cover his legal fees. So let me put that. I'm gonna let that sink in for a minute. Then I'm gonna reiterate it. The U.S. government settled the suit with Lance Armstrong for $5 million. Of that $5 million, he has to pay Floyd Landis $1.5 million. And he also has to pay Floyd Landis' legal fees. Remind you, this case has been going on for a few years, so there's no telling how much his legal fees are, Floyd Landis's. And so I know most people were asking me, who gives a shit? Why do you give a shit about Lance Armstrong? Who cares? He shouldn't have did it. If he wouldn't have did it, it wouldn't have happened. And I want to offer one thing. There was already a dispute with his samples with the drug testing agency. That's number one. Number two, how somebody else get caught doing illegal shit, but when they get caught, their first thing is to throw Lance under the bus. I'm talking about Floyd Landis. So Floyd Landis gets caught, and I just was doing how Lance Armstrong told us to do. I mean, he was a team leader, so I was doing whatever he said. My thing is this: you're a grown-ass man. How's somebody gonna make you do anything? Number two, what type of man are you when something happens to you? You don't own up and take responsibility for it, but you also drag somebody else's name down in the mud, regardless if it was warranted or not. You still ain't have to say anything about that man and deal with the consequences of your own actions. See, what a lot of people don't realize is I've always kind of pulled for Lance Armstrong and his Live Strong brand and all of that, because I can only imagine how scary that would be, having cancer in the nuts. Or how about getting treatment? Or will I still have the same type of erections and sexual attractions for women like I did before? So for him to go through all of that and come back and win the race, I think is nothing short of remarkable. Now I'm going to switch gears a little bit, but it's going to be on the same topic. I'm going to talk about Roger Clemens and Andy Pettite. Apparently there had been some unscheduled stops apparently they had decided to work out together. I'm talking about Pettite and Roger Clemens, excuse me. Both of them do fine. Roger Clemens is the more accomplished pitcher. His location skills, just everything about him as a pitcher is just off the charts. So I don't think he ever needed steroids for performance enhancing. I think he was probably using them as a pain reliever. Because you have to remember, Roger Clemens was throwing in the high 90s until, hell, I don't even remember. However, this thing about Andy Pettite and Roger Clemens is the same thing. I mean, the circumstances surrounding how the person found it is easy. But that's why you have to be careful when you do these events. Allow yourself to be seeing all of these things can have an effect on you. And what I mean by these events and things can have an effect on you is Pettite, all he had to do was talk about himself. But because you got caught once again, I'm gonna tell on everybody. Such a pussy move. I don't even understand it. Because guess what? If I was an athlete and somebody, if I asked me if I use steroids, yes. Yes, I have. Why? The funny thing about the Roger Clemens and the Andy Pettite thing is Roger Clemens was looking at significant jail time. I don't know how you can put somebody in jail for a super long time for taking a drug if they're not administering it or being part of the solution. Both of these cases show you the prime example of the pussified man, for lack of a better word. Both of these instances show you how let me take that back. In both examples, you see examples of weak-ass men who are scared to take the weight and the responsibility for the actions they created and deal with them accordingly. So in order to get like these passes or, well, oh, I'm not that bad, look at Donald Trump, or whatever the case may be, it just doesn't matter. So with that said, that's going to be the last I really talk about this issue. But I suggest you take a look at it. Tell me what you think. Don't forget to subscribe. All the haters and non-players. Don't forget to subscribe. Haters, keep it moving. Comment if you like the post. It's your boy Jay, and I'm out.